So thank you very much. I'm really happy that I can follow a lot of ideas of Professor Lipke, and I know his wonderful studies. So I will just open several topics, and I can continue that. And one does not have to be a fan of Karl Marx to notice that every social change had its proponents and opponents. The former initiated, or at least actively welcome it, with a vision of benefits of various kinds, while the latter may perceive it as a threat for various real or perceived reasons. There is no reason to believe that conversion to Christianity in early Middle Ages was an exception. We saw a lot of examples of this process. There is a general consensus that Christianity entered in early medieval barbarian societies in Bohemia, Poland, Hungary, at the initiative of the authorities. And in the first phase, it spread through the prestigious social networks. In all regions, we can also observe a very close interplay between Christianization and political centralization. Unlike our early medieval informers, who usually presented the Christianization as a one-time event, today we perceive the Christianization as a long-term process. Let us mention here, for instance, the three-stage model developed for Scandinavia, with distinguishing contact phase associated with the process of cultural osmosis, contacts between pagans through the trade, war, and so on and so on. A moment of conversion associated with the official baptism of the main authority, and the final phase, the consolidation, accompanying growing familiarity, it's quotation, with Christian images, concepts, and claims. Medieval writers were keen to confuse the moment of conversion of rulers or leaders and the founding and the first churches with the unconditional acceptance of God's word by all population groups. This narrative was based on the imperial model of authority, where the ruler's decisions are binding on the entire community. However, the societies of the former period in the Barbaricum were based on a different social concept and codes and principles. I will mention the colorful story of San Ansgar's second mission journey to Sweden in 852, recorded by Rimbert. It aptly documents the clash between the universalist Frankish imperial model of rule and the collectivist local reality. I believe that some missionaries may have taken very similar experiences with them from Central Europe too. As an experienced missionary, Ansgar began by meeting the highest local authority, the King Olaf at Birka. We know Birka, of course, the important marketplace in Sweden, from whom he apparently expected personal conversion and effective support for the spread of God's word. But after receiving rich gifts and blessing from Louis the Pious, King Olaf told him, and this is a quotation, "It is our custom that the control of public affairs of all kinds should rest with the people as a whole, not with the king. The operation of the mission had to be approved not just by the public assembly, but, which is of course funny, by the lot which expressed the will of the local gods to accept the new god, the Christian god." Yeah? Thus, although Ansgar's actions were approved, they were not valid for other regions. And the King Olaf told him, okay, so this is our case. We decided that we will accept our God, but you know, I cannot tell you that in another town they will make the same, although I'm the king of them as well. Yeah. Let us just say that, it is presented in the legend that it was very successful and so on and so on and so on. But the real promotion of Christianity in Sweden did not begin until the beginning of 11th century during the reign of Olaf Stadskonung, which means 150 years later from this story. Yeah. I will just mention, and Professor Lipke told a lot about it, which is for me, which is a real laboratory of unsuccessful Christianization. This is the area of Polabian Slavs, from the 10th to 12th century with repeated Christianization attempts. Rimbert's narrative is not, of course, an ethnographic record, but it is nevertheless a very valuable, thick description of the social institutions throughout the former Barbaricum. They have blocked the promotion of social change. As Karol Modzelewski have shown in a number of examples in his fantastic book, the main organizing principle of the social architecture of pre-state society was a kingship and affiliation with regional segments, which could temporarily become the part of larger confederations, but phases of integrations altered with phases of disintegrations. The main institution of decision-making and law were the assemblies, which, at least in theory, interpreted the will of all the free inhabitants of the given territory. Collectivist decision-making institution undoubtedly existed in various forms in all other Central European regions before emergence of stable monarchies. The tradition of assemblies continued to survive even within the structures of Christian monarchies in the form of so-called land assemblies. Information about large assemblies still occurred in Bohemia, Poland, and Hungary in the 12th century. In all these monarchies, the acclamation of rulers was still, even if only symbolically, a matter for all free population. It was not until the 13th century that the ancient collectivist principle of public administration was definitely replaced in Central Europe by an elite model of dominance. We can therefore conclude that at the time of the advent of Christianity, dukes were certainly not autocratic rulers, but rather charismatic and general leaders. Like Olaf in Sweden, they may have been significantly constrained by so-called tribal institutions, but the functions and powers of leaders undoubtedly varied regions by regions and moreover changed very dynamically. In any case, non-consensual claims could easily meet resistance. All the dynasties of Central Europe began their careers as rulers of pagan societies. Unfortunately, written sources do not inform us about the role in pre-Christian religions and public rituals activities. Nevertheless, it is very likely that the protection and organization of public cult and active participation in main public ceremonies were among the important duties of the leaders. In Rus, for instance, Prince Vladimir allegedly attempted to reform the pagan cult before adopting Christianity, which he therefore had to manage. The great seasonal religious festivals were probably regularly linked to the sessions of the assemblies. The very fact that in all polities of Central Europe, the first churches were established under the control of the ruling elites on the grounds of the fortified centers is, in my view, sufficient to argue for the prior link between highest elite and organization of public religion. The motivation of early medieval elites to convert have been discussed many times. For Central Europe, too, we can accept the initial thesis of English historian Nicholas Higham, that the Christian rulers of the first generation did not share the worldview, value system, or beliefs of the missionaries they protected and sheltered. It was probably usually a pragmatic decision, as a political macro context play an essential role for leaders involving in international elite networks. Christianity was part of prestigious cultural package, the acceptance of which enhanced the domestic leaders' ratings as a political partners and the alliances and marriage possibilities. The political potential of conversion was effectively handed by both Frankish and Byzantine rulers, who often became godfathers of local elites and invested in costly baptismal gifts. As in Anglo-Saxon context, baptismal patronage could become a symbolic tool of a dominance over local elites. In a long run, however, Christianity also offered significant symbolic capital, reinforcing the power of the ruler from this collectivist principle to the autocratic principle at the expense of these ancient institutions associated with pagan cults. Pagan religion was, and we think so, was inherently decentralized, and individual regional cult centers must therefore have been complicated to control and establish common ideology around, integrating the entire political territory. Rulers subsequently became the main protectors and sponsors of the church, which in turn provided them with a new sacral legitimacy and administrative know-how. The main economic condition was the provision of permanent and independent resources, which the ruler and the elite had to possess. Thus, an alternative hierarchized ecclesiast network gradually formed, in which the rulers, through their influence over bishops and main ecclesiastical institutions, directly controlled and used it to integrate symbolically the whole territory. A number of examples suggest the inclusiveness of Gentile religion. We mentioned it, so Voivode and so on. As Rimbert recounts, if the local god agreed, the Christian god could join them and became one of the gods of Swedes. In any case, the ruler's personal conversion to Christianity itself was not perceived as a threat by pagan societies. Almost in all polities of the former Barbaricum zones found themselves in the situations for the longer or short time when a Christian leader represented the pagan communities. As the stories of Abodrites or Varagrians illustrates, in extreme cases, the coexistence of Christian rulers and predominantly pagan population could last for many generations. The threat then became not the adoption of Christianity itself, but its exclusive claims, which required the radical collective cutting of ties with traditional ancestral customs. The destruction of pagan cult sites associated with regional identities could be seen as a violation of the traditional social code. In this context, the close connection between Christianization and the political centralization in early Middle Ages makes clear sense. It is not coincidence that unlike Central European dukes, the rulers of Abodrites or Varagrians succeeded in neither. The converting leaders were certainly well aware of this neuralgic moment. What the Christian authors present as a radical cut then must have been a very complex and long-term process of negotiation with various social groups. Pagan and Christian institutions therefore probably coexisted in many places for the shorter or longer time together. I will use the exotic example from Africa, but I think it can be the real mirror for a lot of societies in Central Europe too. So this is a quotation. of Adrian Hastings, from the Adrian Hastings books about Christianization of the coming Islam coming to Northern Africa. So I quote: "If the kings were mostly Muslim, they remain for the most part hardly less participants in the network of traditional religion, and Muslim visitors may often have been offered by the rapid transformation from one form of discourse to another. From an institutional and international and intertribal perspective, their status rested in their Islamic identity. But in terms of local support at the heart of their kingdom, it rested in the rituals of the traditional religion, and only the greatest kings could afford and abandon the latter. As his power waned and traders moved away, the warm embrace of traditional religion, its rituals, and its own monarchical mystic remained the only safe opinion for them." So that's the end of quotation. The Christianization of symbolic communications and rituals of power was therefore a long-term affair. We know a lot of things about it because of course, our informers who don't like to know about it and try to present that everything was Christian and so on and so on. But we can just mention the political myths of Origo Gentis, or some intronization rituals in Bohemia, I don't know, in Carantania and so on, which were of old origin and remained until the Christian period. So, and this is just, I think, the top of the iceberg, we know, yeah, to 15th century, yeah. Unfortunately, with the exception of Polabian Slavs, we have almost no written records of the forms of coexistence of traditional religions and ritual elements with Christianity. Furthermore, most of the reports about Polabians reflects only the situation after the Great Pagan Revolt in 983. The clearly defined pagan identities here perhaps were only created by long-term confrontation with Christianity, and some elements of Christianity were perhaps adapted by them, like stable temples and so on and so on. So perhaps traditional cults without this opposition of identities were probably originally much less organized and rather cyclical in character. The careers of individual gods and cults could be linked with the military and political success of particular political segments and associated with identities. We also have an extreme problem with the archaeological identification of sites and forms of Christian cult. I will just follow what was said yesterday by Jiří, which was fantastic. From today's Czech Republic, we can just mention these examples to show you something, some pictures. We can mention Mikulčice, where there were allegedly two structures which were formerly connected with a pagan worshipping, you know, by excavated by Zdeněk Klanica, and but after new revision analysis of Marian Mazuch and Marek Hladík, they completely rejected the first one, this one, which was the part of the river, yeah, for sure. So that was, it was not some kind of pagan temple, and significantly questioned the second one. Now I will show you the example from Bohansko. So I will, there's something special for Jiří Macháček, and we can mention these two structures on Bohansko, which are very similar. Jiří told us that it was excavated by Professor Dostal, and it was originally thought to be a pagan temple. It was reconstructed like that. inter alia, based on the distant analogy from the Kiev. But if we look to the Bavaria, we can find very similar structures, which are a bit bigger, but in fact they are very, very similar, which are reconstructed not, it's from the same time, which are not reconstructed at the pagan shrines, but as a granaries, you know. So I don't suggest that in Pohansko the interpretation is wrong, you know, but it's another possibility, and I show it just for the purpose to demonstrate that it's really absolutely complex, you know, to identify these structures. But we can look at the matter from the another side, and I will show you some example from my excavations. In recent years, we managed to uncover in a Vinor stronghold situated about 10 kilometers from Prague Castle, the remains of a huge hall building, 2 meters wide and 50 meters long in the northern part. And as you can see on the map, it is really situated 10 kilometers from Prague Castle, another 10 kilometers from Stará Boleslav. It is dated to the beginning of 10th century, so to the time officially connected with the advent of Christianity in Bohemia. And this is the reconstruction of the hall. Here you can see the ground plan. Here you can see the reconstruction of this type of the building from Denmark, and I think it was originally very similar in the construction. And in the corner of this hall, we have found the rich grave of a small girl around, I don't know, 12, 13 years old, with rich equipment. You can see gombiki here and earrings and so on. And she was buried there in isolation in the corner of the hall, you know. So this is something absolutely exceptional. And of course, we can say, all right, you know, this was a place of assemblies, of collecting people. Of course, it could gather together hundreds of people, you know, so 50 meters long, if you can imagine, yeah. So really, really huge building. But can we exclude that at the beginning of 10th century, it was also the place of pagan worshipping, you know, close to Prague Castle? I think we can't, you know. So perhaps the places of pagan worshipping have a different form in this type of the advent of Christianity, and I think we are really still under very strong influence of Christian writers, of the legends presented, San Wenceslas, and so on and so on. But the reality could be much more complex. In any case, effective Christianization was not possible without the effective support of the elites, which is important thing. Mass baptism preceded by the consensus decision in the council had much greater chance for the lasting effect than the individual ruler's conversion. In any case, without the representatives of noble families who formed intermediaries between the central power and the regional nodes through their own social networks, the initial Christianization was not realizable. Nobles of various origins formed the core of military retinues, and in all Central European monarchies subsequently provided the administration of the different regionals through a system of regional fortified centers, subordinate to the monarch. Castle churches, eventually churches in the courts of the rulers, too, gradually became the nodes of Christianization. The spread of Christianity became a form of loyalty, rewarded with various social benefits. Communication between regional centers and rural segments had to be handled by lower management. Information about new religion, its benefits and pitfalls undoubtedly flowed through these social channels. However, despite the rapid territorial expansion and establishment in the international political field associated with the founding of bishoprics and archbishoprics, the early Central European early states were still structurally weak and insufficiently integrated internally. the great crisis of Poland and Hungary in the beginning of 11th century, following the reigns of exceptionally able and charismatic rulers, the Boleslav the Brave and St. Stefan, were caused by the combination of external and internal factors. Written sources in both cases speak of both rebellions against the elites and central government and opposition to Christianity associated with the destruction of churches and killing of priests. Thus, in both polities, there were still large groups of the population and part of the elites who did not accept either the hierarchical principle of the monarchy or the new religion. In Poland, the subsequent renewal of church organization took many decades, while in Hungary, the last pagan uprising broke out at the General Council at the late 1060s, although it was soon suppressed. However, neither the aforementioned individual conversions of elite nor the consensus decision of the council could have had such great effect, and it was again mentioned by Professor Lipke, without the existence of accessible churches served by professional clergy. As we have already noted, the first stage of Central European polities was characterized by the close connection between the church organization and fortified centers of governments. This is thus a different pattern what we know from post-Roman Western Europe, where the churches were also established in large numbers in the countrysides on the initiative of local elites. However, there were still many questions about the development of the earliest church organization that only archaeological research can answer. In any case, in Bohemia and Poland, for a long time, there was a significant disproportion between the centralizing nuclei, in Bohemia, the central part, in Poland, the part of Wielkopolska and the area around Krakow, and the outskirts, where although we lack the precise dates, it seems that in more developed Bohemia, churches were established in all major regional centers only during the second half of 10th century or at the beginning of 11th century. And in case of much larger Poland, the process of building of the foundation of church organization took considerably longer. For instance, and it was analyzed now by my colleague, in the vast region of Kujavia, for example, which was on the very close to the crystallizing center in Wielkopolska, the first churches were established only at the beginning of 12th century. So, you know, and the official conversion was in 60s of 10th century, and it was several kilometers from several dozens of kilometers from the core of the territory. So we can ask, you know, how local elites worshipping the Christian gods in this region? Did they worship the Christian god? So we don't know. Titmar of Merseburg also included several mocking remarks about ambitious Polish king Boleslav the Brave in his chronicle. He writes that even in the time of Prince Mieszko, who was still a pagan, every wife had to follow his husband after death. She was beheaded and burnt with him. Archaeology gives him credit, at least in the latter, with the exception of Hungary. In all regions after discussion before the advent of Christianity, cremation was entirely predominant form of burying dead people. Although the negative attitude towards the burning of dead was not based on any clear theological justification, the barbaric custom was associated by the church with a pagan identity, and as such was completely unacceptable for them. Although the onset of inhumation was not necessarily linked to conversion everywhere, abandoning cremation was certainly one of the first requirements for fresh converts. The dynamics of burial ritual change can or may thus be one of other important barometers, not only of the promotion of Christianization, but also of the impact of central power at the local level. Unfortunately, cremation burials rarely survive, so we can usually only assess the appearance of inhumation graves. We can mention Great Moravia and Bohemia, where the mass abandonment of cremation probably occurred within a few decades after the official conversion in 9th and the beginning of 10th century in Bohemia, and not only in the agglomeration of important centers, but also in the countryside. But if you look at Poland, the picture is completely different, and there are the regions, and again, you know, I can mention the studies of Przemysław Urbanczyk or Martin Danielewski, and it's very likely that even when the Emperor Otto III traveled in 1000 to Gniezno summit, soon he followed by his establishment of archbishopric, he would see burning pyres on his way somewhere in Poland. There is a very raw archaeological representation of skeletal burials older than the early 11th century around the main centers of early Piast dynasty, indicates that the practice of cremation was common perhaps by the elites surrounding the first Christian rulers. So I'm going to the end. As I have indicated, the regional centers of pre-Christian cult functioned as a keynotes of social life and collectivist transcendence, where the social and cosmic order was symbolically articulated. Festivities, public rituals, and sacrifices ensure health and prosperity, as well as supra-communal exchange of information and arrange the marriages and so on, were among the cultural universals of the all agrarian societies. The social consolidation function of collective rituals is indisputable for any agrarian society. It was thus up to new Christian elites to satisfy old demands in a new, at least formally Christianized form. Where an accessible network of castle churches could be built in the relatively short time, the involvement of rural communities in public Christian rituals could be relatively smooth and unconflicted. Again, I just follow what was said by Professor Lipke now, yeah? But in some cases where the local elites were weak or was not Christianized, therefore common people, there was not other chance to take part in old pagan forms of collective rituals because the churches were not accessible, for instance, as in Poland. So in the environment of European barbaricum, the adaptation of Christianity appears as an ideological and cosmological correlate of the new social code associated with the emergence of early states. It is therefore impossible to determine what was the cause and what was the effect. The Christianization of the society, therefore, could not have been one-time act, as Christian authors linked to present it, but a complex process of negotiation in which old elements were incorporated into the new framework, Interpretatio Christiana. Different social groups benefited from these changes in various degrees. In all the polities under discussion, the church became an autonomous social force during the 12th century, but not its full extent until the 13th century. Until then, the promotion of Christianity and the protection and material security of ecclesiastical institutions were entirely dependent on the elites. So I think we cannot think about Christianization without thinking about changes of social structures. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ivo, for your paper. And the discussion is open for... Okay.
So thank you very much for your insightful presentation. You mentioned the connection between Christianization and elite dominance, the end of, let's say, the collectivist elements of a Slavic society. Just a thought, it might be unconnected. I'm throwing it there. There's a third phenomenon that happens around the 13th century in Slavic societies, and that's the linguistic breakdown, the end of, let's say, Slavic linguistic unity, which linguists say orientatively is around the 13th century. So do you think there might be a connection? It's just a brainstorming idea, but I noticed that there's this also concurrently.
Thank you very much for a perfect question. Honestly, I didn't think about it yet, so I don't know what to answer. Yeah, perhaps, we can see, I think, very strong interconnection of all these Central European monarchies already in 11th, 12th century. We can just mention, I don't know, the archaeological picture. If you look at the cemeteries from 11th century Poland, Bohemia, and Hungary, you will find the completely same picture in 11th century. So the women had the same type of jewelry. They were buried in the completely same way. So sorry, I don't want to escape your question. Yeah, but I just want to say that for sure, there was very strong communication between these regions and the pattern of worshipping. So I think it's very probable what you have mentioned, that the linguistic change was one of the part of this interconnection too. Yeah, why not?
Okay, so Platensky.
First, to answer this linguistic question, as far as I know, while the Old Slavic language was never quite unique, it was unique on the level of grammatic and I think also syntax, but not for sure not on the level of the lexic. And even in the 10th century, there are quite good seen the differences between further on later languages of the Slavs. So I think it's not connected. But I would then rather like to comment quite only a little, but I like Pohansko because we were there together with Jiří already before 30 years, and it's a part of my soul. Can you please show us these two let's say supposed cult structures? Well, this idea that this plan could be a part of a granary. It's old. It was said already 40 years ago. It was, I think, in some conference in Nové Vozokany, where Peter Donat showed his plans of the granaries, houses, and so on. And there was also Boživoj Dostal there with his cult structure. There was no discussion about it. But of course, in the first moment, I thought also that this was a cult structure. Then I was really in chains, in mind chains. Now what to see here, what it should be. But now I still think it is a cult structure. And why? It's right that the both plans are similar, but this is a homonymy, and it is not a synonymy. because the upper structure, it stands in the middle of a graveyard. It's for sure that nobody will build the granary in the middle of the graveyard. And the second structure is in the middle of the archaeoastronomical structure, which was showed yesterday by Jerzy. And then it's even some other detail. It is surrounded with 27 post holes. Yesterday I have said that the number 27 is also a very important symbolical number. And these are 27 days of the walk of the moon. After 27 days, it rises at the same place as before 27 days. And there is a very, well, the strongest curse, how to bring your beloved back to name the 27 days. And this is the symbol of the dying and a new life. So, and it is connected with the cemetery. So this is the belief that that those who died, their souls will come back. And I think both plans are the plans of the, let's say, cult structures.
Andre, if you believe it.
I really loved your lecture, and I wanted to say it really reminds me of current times and us entering the EU. We've been baptized, the elites were baptized, you know, everybody thinks, okay, here we are sitting, we are all EU citizens. 20 years later, we are still explaining to our lower social classes that that's a good thing, you know, takes a while.
Yeah, you are completely true, and I think we can find a lot of recent analogies from our society. Let us mention, I don't know, the wave of traditionalist and right-winged thinking in our societies. Yeah, after the very rapid and sometimes violent westernization of Central Europe in '90s. Yeah. So I don't know, in Poland, you can mention that there is really the return of traditional thinking and Catholicism and all identities, and you can see it everywhere. So I think the so-called pagan reactions were something like that, because, you know, it was a clash at the beginning, and of course the elite promised the people, okay, it will be fantastic for everybody. But after several decades, they find out that it is fantastic, but not for everyone, yeah, but just for someone, yeah. So perhaps, you know, that is universal for every social change, that there are promoters and people who did not benefit on globalization or Christianization and so on and so on. So.
Okay, thank you very much once again.